Here's your host, mug collector, and cardigan queen, Joelle.
Hello, my little feisty mindfulness tribe. It is good to see my friends here on
Does
video.
it say you can't see them?
No, but I can see you guys. And then it's also good to be recording. It's Caleb and I. He's joining me, hopefully for good. No more sabbaticals.
Got the job.
Yeah, things don't go that great without you. So I'm glad you came back. And then we have our guest today, who is a friend of ours and also previous co-workers of different sorts, which will be fun to talk about. Brandon Shafer. Brandon,
Yes.
do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Brandon. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super pumped to be here and just kind of hang out, especially being social distancing, right? So we're getting to see each other.
Yes.
I probably see you more now than I did outside of work when I was there closely. But so my name is Brandon. I am a photographer. I love to travel. I'm an adventure seeker and a technology gadget nerd. So that's a little bit about me, but yeah.
Yeah, so so Caleb and I know Brandon from working at Apple, and I think everybody knows by now that how influential our time at Apple has been for various different reasons. So that's one thing, and then I had the privilege of being able to work with Brandon at a wedding once, which was tons of fun.
Yeah. A couple years ago.
Yeah,
In
Tyler and I
Traverse
both
City.
got to. We love Traverse City, so that was just like a big bonus. So, we've gotten to hang out since then, since I left Apple as well. And another reason we were hoping to snag Brandon after his travels that I'm hoping he'll tell us about too, but he has also had many conversations with both Caleb and I about like mental health in general and the role and how it kind of plays out in our world right now. And so we're really excited to get a nice, fresh perspective and
Totally.
how that kind of ties into today and your life and how you got here and all that good stuff. So, I'm
absolutely.
excited.
Me too. It's going to be fun to dive in.
I think Caleb had a couple of questions if we want to start there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to have a good chance to talk about a bunch of things. And I just kind of wanted to start, Brandon, with the reason we brought you on is like you just finished a bunch of traveling and stuff, but there was some stuff like in your life that kind of caused you to want to travel and to want to just kind of like change the entire like way you were living your life, essentially.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe just kind of give us a whatever 1,000-foot view or whatever you want to start at of like your life. Maybe how long has it been now? Was that about 1.5 years or 2 years ago now?
Yeah.
From
a little
when?
over a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And everything kind of started.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I think just starting with like where my love for travel kind of started and what kind of ultimately led that. So I graduated high school in 2005 and I joined a performing arts group. Oddly enough, that's a whole nother conversation. I got accepted into this performing arts group called the Young Americans.
This is the connection to Wayland, by the way.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other pot of coffee.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how I was part of
You're right.
that
I
group.
am going to need a wine refill.
Yeah, I know. We could go into the deep conversation. Long story short, you'll get a little chuckle out of this one. I sang Row, Row, Row Your Boat for my audition for this group, and somehow I made it into the Young Americans. Now, you look around at people like Phil and Mitch from Wayland, and there's just so many amazing, talented people out there that come from this group. Yeah, and I don't know how I made it into this group, but I got accepted, and I was like, I had no other plans after I graduated high school other than to move to Colorado and go snowboard. So I was like, all right, my parents didn't think that was really a successful option for me. So I was like, all right, my backup option is to move to California.
So were you going to try and like be pro?
Be what? Like snowboard?
Yeah. like
No, I'm
professionally?
not. I could do nothing pro. I'm not anything pro. I'm
Well,
like a pro
you're a
coffee.
pro photographer.
Yeah, I'm a pro
So
photographer
that
and a pro
counts.
coffee drinker. But I always dreamed of that. My ultimate dream was to be a rock star like Caleb. But yeah, but so I moved out to California. I joined this performing arts group. I didn't even know what a musical was when I joined this group, and it was
How?
quite a
They must have been
disaster, but-
desperate.
Yeah, they were super desperate. Like 300 kids from all around the world get accepted into this every year. I think I was just a mistake. Like they were like, this guy.
They
Yeah.
mistaked
guy
you
looks
for
good.
somebody
Remember
else.
American Idol when that one guy was like one of the first few episodes, and he was like, she bangs, oh baby,
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was. I was like that clown that they're like, yeah, this guy's going to Hollywood. So
He'll find a way.
yeah, so I joined this performing arts group. I did a year of schooling, and then I got to travel around the world teaching kids. So I taught music and production stuff. So every 3 days we were in a new city, a new town, and that was like a year after out of high school. I was already over in Europe traveling around, and
Wow.
it was just really neat to kind of have that experience of travel. And I've always just loved traveling. And then when I got home, I traveled with some different bands doing music and doing photography for bands. And I've always just had a love for travel and kind of got me out. And then, so kind of leading to where I was at presently. So about 2 years ago, I went through a divorce, and that kind of changed my world. It's just something that you never hope for anybody, but it's a huge eye-opening moment in life.
Yeah.
And like, it's how you kind of approach it. It's how you handle that situation. And shortly after that, of everything that kind of went down, I realized how much I was a giver. I'm a huge giver, and like I give so much. And I think like to the point where I would use this analogy with people. I love analogies, but I'm constantly pouring into everybody else's cups, and I was never pouring into my own cup. Mm-hmm. And I realized like when everything kind of went down with the divorce, like I knew I had to just get out. Now, as you mentioned, I am a wedding photographer, so leading up to this, like right after everything and during the separation, I ended up having to go right into wedding season. So I couldn't just like leave. It was like go right through all of this and then go right into wedding season.
And then be surrounded by like gushy love.
Yeah. Like, capturing love stories. It's like, God, I fucking hated it. But and it was just
was
like
that the season that I photographed?
I think it was the season before. So last year was that season. I think we shot the year before on that one.
It would have been the year before that. Yep.
Yeah, because I was working at Apple still.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. So, I just kind of knew, and like halfway through, or like as I was going around, I would just meet up with all my friends and just kind of looking for any advice anybody could have. Some stuff you wanted to hear, some stuff you didn't. And I was sitting at Founders with my buddy Tim, and he's like, dude, you should just go travel. And that was a moment that I was like, maybe that's what I need to do right now. And I asked myself a quote from one of my favorite bands, Incubus, and it was, if not now, then when? Right? And it was just kind of like, when the hell am I ever going to have this opportunity again? And right now, it's more important than ever to fill my own cup and take care of myself and do what I'm meant to do and see what is possible out there. And so I just I knew that was my goal in sight. And so trying to go a whole summer with just like knowing that was at the end of the summer, it was getting ready to leave. So I left in November. So everything started in March and I left in November.
Wow. I remember having a moment that was kind of like that, where I was talking to my best friend, and she was like, and I was like, what if I just like packed up and left? Like I don't have an apartment right now. Like
I remember you asking me that a few times as well. Like,
yeah, I was like, what if I could go anywhere right now? Like I've always wanted to move somewhere warmer. Like My poor little brain is not built for winter. Like it, I just, I just have the hardest time with winter, and I'm cold all the time, which doesn't help. And and I was like, what if I just pack up and I go? And I had just gotten to work at the Apple store down in Indianapolis, and I was just like, heck yeah. And the girl that I roomed with during that trip was from Louisville, and she was like, we would take you, like, hands down, like, come work for my store. Like, and I love working with her and stuff like that. And I was like, maybe I'll just do it. Like, maybe I'll just like, why not? Because it's exactly like that, where you're just like, if not now, when?
And your brain is going through such radical changes at that time too, that you're just like, everything just sounds good, and they're like, I'll do anything. I just want to get out of here. I want change. And like, you're just open to so many new ideas and opportunities and like things that you didn't ever know were capable of, or like you just had complete freedom. And it was just like, I can do whatever the fuck I want to do. Like, and I remember telling people like, yeah, I'm going to go travel. And they're like, for how long? And I'm like, for a while. Yeah. I just want to go. Like, I think for me,
one-way ticket travel.
Yeah, I think for me, part of the thing that I've always loved was like having that world as my playground. Being able to have that complete freedom of I can go anywhere that I want. As a photographer, also, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way, that sometimes as an artist, you feel like you're doing a lot of stuff repetitive, right? I kept telling people like, I felt like I was just painting the same canvas over and over and over. And I just needed change. My eyes needed to see new things. All I could see was negative. And it was just something I couldn't get out of my system. Like before I was traveling, like especially going through everything that that I did, and like you kind of have those feelings, and
there's stuff around you that reminds you of moments, and like not even like specifically like that person, even that I'm talking about like going somewhere and doing something and being like, oh, I remember doing this before, like, and to be able just to like get out from that is such it feels so good.
And especially when like, I mean, we traveled a ton. It was something I always have loved, and like I've kind of brought that into the family, and just kind of we went on a lot of trips together. So that was another thing, is like you have so many memories of not only like food or places you went, but it was like trips that you've taken. I just wanted to kind of clear that. I wanted to make my own memories. I wanted to see, like, have things that I can talk about and share. So, and not always have to have those stories where you're like, yeah, I was with, oh yeah. And then like it kind of brings that memory, and those your mind just starts to travel down those roads a little bit. So
how did you choose like where you wanted to go? Because I think that I might have been like overwhelmed by like, like I hate traveling, right? So that's my thing. No, let me rephrase. In my head, there's a difference between a trip and a vacation. Okay?
Yeah.
Totally. A trip is like, I have an agenda and I got shit to see. Like, I'm ready to go. I got my like little tourist hat on and my camera in hand. Like, I'm ready to like walk the museums and learn some stuff and like be a sponge and like be a part of the culture and all that kind of stuff. And then there's a vacation where I'm like, swimsuit, towel, book, beach, or a pool. And I don't want you to bother me. I'm not going to have my phone on me. I'm not going to worry about anything else. I'm going to just sit here and be this for like days until my brain is just like mush and doesn't care about anything else besides the book in my hand. Like there's a difference. And I got a good tan. I don't know if I tan, honestly, but I like to try. The Irish in me mostly refuses. But in my head, there's a difference, right? Like I'm all about vacation and places that I can drive and like chill and do that. And I like going hiking. We like going and doing like stuff up north or out in parks here or whatever. But like a trip sometimes can be exhausting, and I sometimes get anxious, and planes are not my friend. So in my head,
gotta learn how to play with them.
Right. Yeah. So like in my head, I'm like, I would be so overwhelmed. Like if I wasn't afraid of flying and I wasn't afraid of like traveling and like being stuck somewhere and having a really terrible panic attack and being like in the middle, because that's like a fear of mine, is like to get somewhere where I know nothing, I know no one, and I don't speak the same language, and to have a panic attack in public is like a terrifying.
That was every day for my last 5 months of travel.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I would be lost. I'm not that awesome with directions. And then you put them in a foreign language and I'm so screwed. And so I think that for me, I'd be so overwhelmed. Like if I didn't have those like fears kind of like holding me back, I would be like, I could go anywhere. Yeah. And then it would be like really overwhelming because I wouldn't know where I wanted to go first. So how did you choose? Like, how did you decide where to go?
Yeah, good question. So when I was in the performing arts group, my first place I ever visited outside of the US was Heathrow Airport in London. So London, I traveled England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales for my first tour with the Young Americans. And like I was saying, every 3 days you're in a new place, new city, new school. It all kind of starts to look the same. It's like going on tour with a band. It's fun, but every stage kind of starts to look the same because it's the same setup, the same lights, kind of figures like that. And I knew I always wanted to go back. Now, something I've always had interest in is kind of travel hacking. So it's traveling for as cheap as possible or finding the good deals, right? Because for some reason, airplane tickets just fluctuate on a daily basis. It's like our news right now, like shit changes like every hour. Like it's how airplane tickets go.
Wear a mask. Don't wear a mask.
And
wear the mask in public. No, don't. Wear it inside.
Right. Don't know. Some have it, some don't. Some are open, some aren't. Some you gotta
I think I'm just gonna wear the mask everywhere.
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to go to England. Now, leading up before that, I did take a couple cool trips last summer as well. So I went to Atlanta and I went scuba diving in the Atlanta Aquarium. So that was kind of a neat. It was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it big, right? So that was my first dive. And then a couple months later, I was in Colorado.
You had to get certified for that, right?
Yep. So that was one thing I did for myself. And it was like looking out for yourself, right? Like right after that divorce, I was like, I love travel. I love adventure. I need to do stuff that I've always talked about, but I never did it because of some reason, right? Mm-hmm. So I did that. I got certified. I went to Atlanta, and I found a cheap flight. I use an app called Scott's Cheap Flights. It's amazing.
That sounds
You're like,
homemade.
what the hell is it? It's the greatest app ever. It shows you all of the mistake airlines, like mistake flights. So you'll usually only have like 24 to 48 hours.
Caleb's face.
To
I'm skeptical hippo about that. That's
I'm not skeptical, but it's an I've never heard of this.
A mistake flight. I'd be like, nope, it's jinxed.
No, it's like it shows you how to book them and everything. Do your own thing. If you don't want to do it, that's more for me, and I'm okay with that. I'm just trying to give you a little secret, and you're like, I won't even tell you about the other ones, but Scott's cheap
flights. Okay.
Flights, yep. And I signed up for like the premium membership. I think it was only like $30 for a year, but you can select your airport, and it will then send you all of the flights that are going from that airport. So like my flight, so I decided to go to London. I was like, I'm going to start in London. I have a good friend. I have a lot of friends from the UK, but I had a really good friend that I wanted to stay with. I actually went to my first football match. I went to a Leeds United game, which was really cool. But yeah, so my flight from Chicago to London was only $330 round trip.
Wow.
Good night.
So, I mean, take your own Scott's Cheap Flights. I had to book it instantly, which is sometimes the best thing to do because I think also a lot of people would travel. It's that fear that goes through their heads, right? There's so much fear that goes into travel of like, where am I going to stay? Am I going to be able to get time off work? Am I going to do this?
Yeah.
And then like we just outthink it. You know how many times you think of a vacation like, hey, we're going to go to Mexico this year, and like you go through
And
so
then
many times,
over
or
like
it's
8 months, you like end
Yeah.
up talking yourself out of it.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
I think that's what's great about like using those websites, and they'll tell you how to book them and everything. I usually will try to share some, or if you just kind of follow it, but you can find relatively cheap flights, especially now. And if you read up on a lot of them, like even right now, if you book a flight, I'm pretty sure a lot of airlines will, if you have to cancel because of the coronavirus or something kind of going on, they'll refund you all of that. So I do a lot of travel hacking, but I made my way. I traveled to London because that's where I wanted to kind of start. So I started in England and I went all the way around up to Scotland in there.
In London, kind of because it was like slightly
Because they
like,
spoke English. That's
familiar.
definitely.
Is that it? Okay. I was gonna say you said you had friends there, which
Yeah,
like
I have
that would
friends
be
there,
kind
but-
of like bridge the gap between like traveling and not knowing
It's-
anyone or knowing where to go or what
Mind the
how
gap.
to say things.
Yeah. That was kind of where it got a little bit interesting. So I was like, cool, I'm gonna go to London. And that was all I booked. So I booked my ticket and I
Yeah.
booked my hostel for the first like 5 nights. Before that, I've never stayed at a hostel. I had no idea what to expect. I've kind of know the train systems. I've been in big cities, so I was able to kind
Yeah.
of navigate around that. But I was like, I'm gonna do it. And I landed, and with the Jedi flight or the red eye flight, I was like, I get to London, and I had so much energy at like 11 o'clock at night, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go down to the
11
pub.
o'clock there.
Yeah, their time,
Okay.
which was like 5 o'clock our time, I think.
Yeah.
Around there. 5, yeah. So I get there and I'm like, well, I'm gonna go down to the pub, or like into the basement area of this hostel, have a beer, right, and maybe meet some people. So I go to start having conversations. None of them speak English, so I'm like, great, I'm in London. Nobody speaks English, not realizing until that moment that people from London probably don't stay in a hostel
true,
in
yeah.
London.
Oh,
was
no.
like, so everywhere
They're
I
all
go,
in their houses, Brandon.
yeah, I know, right? So using like Google Translate, but I picked London because like I knew it. I wanted to go back and visit it. It has a lot of really cool history to there, and I think it's always just kind of held a really cool place in my heart, especially being the first trip outside of the U.S. So
Yeah.
I talk about that on my podcast. It was my first trip outside of the U.S. I was actually on the same plane as Gene Simmons, and I just wanted to throw that out there for Caleb. Gene Simmons is the guy from Kiss.
Yep.
So, and there's a lot of stories on there, but that was my first trip outside of the U.S. Have you guys been outside of the U.S.?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where have you been? Where was the first place outside of the U.S.?
Oh, well, my Girl
Mexico.
Scout troop went to Canada.
Ooh, nice.
I think that counts.
Yeah, it totally counts.
And that was a lot of fun. And we were young, so there wasn't a lot of like toting of like we were probably 10 or 11. There was not a lot of toting us all around.
Yeah.
So it was like we went for a huge like craft swap. And so
in Canada.
all of us had
You trade a bunch of cookies. I'll give you some purple boxes. If
right?
You never
No,
give away
'cause we
purple
weren't allowed to
boxes.
do-
That's a bad mistake, first off.
We were really young. I don't know if we would have cared at all. And we definitely wouldn't have given away Girl Scout cookies because it was our job to sell them and make money. So there's no way you would have convinced
That's why
one of us to give
I would have
them
never.
away for free.
Maybe why my sister was dropped out of Girl Scouts because I probably just ate all the cookies. But
That she was supposed to sell?
yeah,
Aww.
purple boxes. They're my favorite.
But we went, and anyway, you had to come prepared with things to swap. And so
Cool.
we like sat around and made a whole bunch of different kinds of like 10-year-old crafts and lots of different like bracelets. Anyway, so we did that. And then I don't think that our trip down into the islands, our technically out of the U.S. Is the Dominican Republic? I know this is me showing how like not
totally.
good at
That's
geography.
definitely outside
Dominican
of the US.
Republic is out of the U.S., but
Correct.
I don't know if the other islands. So I think we went to
Hawaii.
No,
That's still part of the U.S.
It is, but it's like totally on the other side. I'm talking about like off Florida.
Cool.
We went on a cruise and we went to 4 different islands. So I think so Dominican was my favorite. That one was a ton of fun. And we went outside of like what the like cruise people tell you you're supposed to do. And we totally hired a guy to like take us around for the day. And it was wicked. Like,
Dominican's a beautiful place. I photographed a couple weddings there.
Amazing. And it was hilarious to this guy that we like spent basically the whole day with. Like, he was out and like ready. Like, he was ready for the tourists. He's like, I have a bus, and if you pay me this much, I will take you around the entire day. Like, from this moment until it is too dark for me to drive without lights. Like,
that's amazing.
I will take you.
Totally.
And I was like,
let's do it.
And our like families like huddled together and like split the cost and handed the guy cash. And he was like, are you ready? Let's do it. And like, he took us around and like, we're talking like there are no turn signals up in those like the like mountains and stuff like that.
Little to be told,
like,
this is probably his first
like,
tour, first and only tour he's ever given.
No, it definitely was not. Like, it was not at all. It was amazing. He was like the best part of our trip.
That's
fun. Missing teeth and all, but it was like one of those things that like, I mean, they don't have turn signals, like forget all of that. They like have honking systems. They like honk their horn to let you know where they are on like these really, really winding like pathways up into like these like mountainous kind of like tree kinds of things. And like, he took us up there and showed us how to, he's like, don't tell anyone where you got these bananas from. And like, just handed us like bananas like off the tree, like from where we were like driving around. And so like we brought bananas back with us, and he was like, you should probably eat them before you get back on the ship. And we were like, all right. So we just like ate bananas like all day long. He took us to a place that used to be like a Coca-Cola shop on tap. So they would have like the different flavors, and they would have like tons and tons of different floats and everything like that. And so they didn't have that anymore, but they had like original Coca-Cola to sell, like bottled. And so we walked around, and like he took us into like a spot with like waterfalls, and like took us up so high that you could see like down over all of like the banana like on the side of this like mountain, and you look out and you could see the water, and you could like see the ship all the way out and stuff. So that was amazing. Like, I would hands down find a way. Somebody drug me and put me on the plane and like just let me show up in Dominican Republic.
You just get done telling us, painting this beautiful picture of your trip, but like leading up before this, like 2 minutes before that, you're like, I hate traveling.
Yeah,
and then you start telling
actual traveling. It's not being in the different
travel
places.
days. You just don't like the travel days.
Yeah, exactly.
Joelle,
travel days.
You don't need to be drugged. You just need a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
No,
that's for breakfast before you get on the plane.
No, because I can't be nauseous. We've talked about this. It's like
you just drink a bottle of wine and then you pass out as soon as you get on the plane.
Oh no,
I've never been drunk before. We've talked about this.
On my way home from Europe, when we were flying back, so I had to fly from Heathrow to LA, and then LA back to Grand Rapids.
By that time, I was thoroughly stalking your Instagram stories, and I was following that whole thing. Yeah. And I was like, this sucks.
The Finland trip. I was talking about my first trip ever abroad, like the one when I was in London. Because you could drink, and I was underage over there. I was like 19 over in Europe, and I was like, yeah. So I started drinking.
You got on the plane, and you were like, let's do it.
Yeah, I was feeling great, and I spent 7 hours getting sick on the back of Virgin Atlantic plane. And like, I kept asking for water. Well, first I asked for an orange juice because I was pretty lit, like getting on the plane. I was like, this is going to be a fun flight. And I was like, I'll take an orange juice. Little to be told, I have a bunch of little shooters with me, right? Because if I couldn't already drink enough in the airport, you always travel little shooters with you, because who wants to buy a $9 drink, right? I don't think that's really legal. I didn't even finish one of those. Like, we started, as soon as we took off, I was feeling great. And as soon as we got above the clouds, everything came up, and I was like, I need water, and they kept giving me like the tiniest little like cups of water, and I was like, can I just get the bottle of water? And they're like, no. And then finally, I must have just looked miserable enough where they let me. And then after dinner service, they let me just take a nap in the back of the plane. You know, like I laid on the floor. Just like
Did you straight up tell them? Were you just like, I'm really sick?
Oh, I didn't even have to tell them. They just knew. This is before. I definitely would not have been able to fly in that condition coming home. But this is like years ago. And they didn't give a shit if you were sick or not. Now they're like, you can't fly with anything. So, but yeah, travel days. I think travel days are like definitely the hardest with traveling.
Yeah.
But for me, it was the most rewarding. Like I loved it. I've always like, even on my trip, I'd spend 3 days in a city. And by then I'm bored. I was like, I want to see something new. Like I just got in this habit of like, I wanted to see new things. Like,
just like,
you know, when you leave when I left my hostel door, you can either go left or right, you know, and like one day you go left, the next day you go right. And I just kept like, after I kept seeing the same stuff or the same food, I was like, okay, I want to leave. And that was what was cool is I never planned anything. So you were like talking about planning stuff. Like I've always planned stuff, like especially leading up to this trip. I've always been a planner, and even with like my life and how everything was going to turn out, which didn't go that way, but I've always planned that, you know. Being a photographer, I'm always constantly planning things, and I just knew that I needed to break that habit. And with traveling, I just wanted to not have a plan at all. Like I wanted to wake up and just go and explore and see what the world had to hold for me that day. I feel like sometimes when we plan stuff, like you were talking about a trip and you plan like, okay, we got to go to this excursion here, and we're going to go on a boat ride in the evening. We're going to have dinner at this restaurant at this time, and things never go as planned. And it's how you handle situations, you know? And like, I can definitely say that after this trip, I handle situations a lot differently. I think I'm a lot calmer about the way things kind of go. And just knowing that like things happen for a reason. And like, I think that if you plan stuff and you don't hit that agenda or that mark for the day, you feel like you didn't accomplish that. And I think that like being able to just kind of wake up and experience whatever came that way was the most exciting thing. Like, I was in Finland. I mean, this is just a recent story, but I was in Finland. I woke up. I wanted to go see the X Games, like go see the snowboard X Games, but it was like 3 hours away. And there was another guy that was in the hostel, and I just struck up a conversation. Luckily, he spoke English, and and I was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm going to go to the ski resort or to the ski competition." And I was like, "I'll go to a ski competition." No idea what it is.
Did it end up being the X Games?
No, it was like it was the cross country ski championship of the world. It was like the Daytona 500 of cross country skiing.
You just like wandered and you're like, I'm here. Whoa.
Yeah, I was like, this is awesome.
I feel like you called me. It was either right before or right after you did that, because
I think I did.
I think it was before, because I don't remember you talking about anything that had happened. But yeah, that's really cool.
I did it. I think, did I do it right after the sauna? I might have called you right after the sauna.
Yeah,
I was pretty stoked. Yep. I jumped in the cold water in Norway. I was like in Oslo. I was like, just jumped in. So I was in Oslo. I wasn't in Finland. I actually met a group from Finland, and I met up with them when I was in Finland. So that was cool. I mean, like you meet so many people when you travel, but I was in Oslo, Norway, and I got to see the cross country ski championship of the world.
Wow. By like fluke, because you were like
just
because
you wake up and go,
place.
you know. Yeah. But if you have agendas like I want to do this and this at this time, and like there's so many times we plan things out and they don't go as planned, especially if you look at the situation we're in right now.
Anyone? 2020?
Yeah, 2020. You plan stuff out. You're like, this could be a great year. We're going to buy a house and travel, and we're going to go here. And it's like, now we're just stuck in our houses
none
for
of
months.
the above.
Yeah, right. So I think just not planning anything, it's something that I'm way more free-spirited than I have ever been. And you just never know what's going to come in front of you if you're always looking at the future. You know, if you're always
like so far into the future. Yeah.
Because you're looking at that and you're missing out on all the current opportunities.
I have a friend that calls that future tripping. Where you're just so
like
preoccupied with you're kind of just like you're so caught up in worrying about what's going to happen that you're not living in the present. You're just always you're tripping on what's hasn't even happened yet. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, that's a huge thing that ties into anxiety, right? Most of the time, anxiety surrounds around something that is in the future that you're worried about happening, and you have no idea if it's going to happen, but you're freaked out about it possibly happening.
Yeah,
you know, and that's like probably the biggest proponent, right, to my anxiety is that kind of like I get caught up into the future. So a huge way for me to combat that is just to be like, okay, I need to take a deep breath and I need to like bring my focus back to something that's like right here in front of me so that I can like stop thinking 18 steps into the future when I don't have control over any of those 18 steps.
Totally.
But I can change what's happening right now.
Absolutely.
So did you said that you tend to or did tend to be somebody who would like plan things out, like even in like personal life as well as like being a professional wedding photographer. But like, so when you set out, did you have to like remind yourself? Like, did you ever start to feel like kind of like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing today? Where am I going? Or like once you kind of like got into that mindset, it was just like you were in it. Like, did you ever have to like fight that like urge to like plan stuff out?
Yeah, I think there was a few times where like if I didn't plan it out, like you couldn't get into a museum at a certain time or you had to have like a time blocked for that. But leading up to it, like you were mentioning, I've always been a planner. It's something that I've always did. It's like we have that naturally built into me or like into us. I think a lot of us is just planning things out no matter what that needs to be. For my trip, I knew I needed to change. I think leading up to it, I just knew I needed it. And I was the only one that was going to be able to make that change for myself. Yeah. So I really just tried to make that effort of like not planning anything out. I've stared at a map hours and hours and hours leading up to this trip, but I just didn't know where I wanted to be. I wanted to see everything. And like I said, always just having the world as my playground versus like, I need to plan here, to plan here, to plan here. And I met a lot of people that traveled like that, or I see people that have itineraries built out, or I've traveled with travel agents and they'll always like write out like a full timeline of everything. Yeah. For me, like when I first started, like I said, when I took off on a plane, I remember landing in London and I was on the train going to the hostel and I was super pumped. I was really excited. I took a selfie with my passport. And then I remember just sitting there. I was the only one on this train. It was late at night. And I thought to myself, what the fuck am I doing? Like,
oh no.
I had like a mini panic attack. Like, okay, it's dark. I'm in London. I have all my valuables. I have 2 bags of stuff with me. And I have no end in sight. And then after
that would freak me out.
Yeah, and so then I was fine the first, like even in London, because I was like, well, I still have a flight home, right? I technically could come home because I bought because my ticket was a round trip ticket, and then after that last day, I remember being on a bus going to a new city. I was heading up to Manchester, and I was like, I either have to go to the airport or I need to continue this trip. And that was a moment that I just kind of like really stepped up to the plate. And like, I was like, like anything is possible. And I am in complete control over every bit of it, of what I wanted to do. If I wanted to stay in a city, I could. If I didn't, I could leave. And that was really cool. So I never planned anything from that moment forward. I didn't even book a hostel until I would get to a city. Like I would get to a city and I would just walk to the hostel. And I'd be like, I need to book a room for a couple nights and then just go. And like flipping coins and throwing darts at maps and stuff, just trying to decide where to go. Like I never knew.
Wait, no, for real?
Yeah. It's like if you're gonna do it big, right? And like just let go of everything. There's like have complete freedom, as much freedom as you can.
What if the coin landed on like
the side,
someplace that didn't have anything? Like
Joelle, coins have two sides to them.
No. I mean, what would happen if you flipped a coin and it landed on us like a location that was like 200 people?
No, like my flipping coin was like when I was in Iceland, I was like, do I want to go to Rome or do I want to go to Barcelona?
Choosing between two. Got it.
Between two. Yeah. Cause it was just, it's making those choices.
Yeah.
As easy as it is the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that, there's so much courage in like deciding like this is how I want this trip to play out, like in the grand scheme of things. Like I'm going to set out to like break down this wall of like planning.
Yeah.
And then having that moment of like I could not do this. This might be just crazy enough for me to not do it. And then just being like, no, I'm going to stick to it. Let's do it. And then like to like just hold to that for like the rest of the trip is pretty awesome. And I imagine it might get easier too.
Yeah, like, towards the end, it was getting easier. And then the whole coronavirus thing started and it started getting a little bit more crazy. But even towards the end, I was just so much more free-spirited. And I was like, you know what? Whatever happens, happens. Like, you're going to miss trains. You're going to miss flights. You're going to have days that are not going to go as planned. But at the end of the day, it's what can you make out of that moment and what can you make out of that day? Granted, it might be raining. We'll go out and explore still. Like, you can do whatever you want. So having that freedom.
Yeah. So speaking of like, where were you when you found out about like coronavirus?
Yeah.
And what did you do? Why is Caleb laughing already?
Because I've been trying to pause for an ad break for like 15
I got
minutes.
my phone saying he wants to take a break.
So you had mentioned everything up until coming home and how your trip was it cut short by coronavirus? And then where were you when you found out that was a thing?
I kind of started seeing it pop up here and there. And then I was actually in Italy when I started hearing about it getting bad. And I left Italy to head, and I spent a lot of time because I was in Rome. I went to Rome, Venice, Milan. I went to like all the big cities. So I spent some time in Italy. And like as I left Italy, it was less than like 7 days is when they started shutting stuff down. And then I started seeing like football matches where they were trying to play like soccer games with no crowds there. And it was like really awkward. I was like, okay, this is getting a little bit bad. And I was in... and I just kept traveling. I was like, I have to keep going. But I had plans to come home in March. So I had a flight booked from March 18th. Shout out to Scott's Cheap Flights. My flight home, I think, was only like $280. And I used some credit card flyer miles for the other part. So, but anyways, we'll get back to that in a second. So I was in Stockholm in Sweden when I woke up that day to a bunch of messages, and they're like, how are you going to get home? Where are you going to be stuck at? And that was when America decided to shut down their borders to everywhere but the UK. For some reason, if you were in London or the UK, you could fly into America. Do you guys remember that? Like a couple weeks ago? Yeah. It was like, so I got online and I looked at.
It was like a month ago.
Yeah.
But okay.
It was a while ago. It feels like forever ago, a few weeks ago. All blends together.
Yeah, it does.
So I was like, shit, what do I do? And this is like March 15th or something. And my last country that I had to go visit was Finland. So I was going to Helsinki that day. I actually had a ferry ride booked from Stockholm to Helsinki. And I read that, or I got all these messages and I was like, shit, how am I going to get home? I didn't know what to do. And I'm eating my breakfast at the hostel. I'm like, my brain's sitting here going like, okay, if I get a flight to the UK, I can go here and I can still make it home.
Gosh.
Otherwise, I go to Finland and I might not make it back to the US. Like, we don't know what's going on at this time. And like, it's kind of like you're weighing yourself out, like what goes what way, right? So,
where do I go?
Yeah. And I had to be home originally because I originally had a wedding scheduled for May 1st. So that was going to be my first wedding of the year. So that was like my tentative date of coming home. Now leading up to that, when the virus started to kind of roll out everywhere, like February-ish time, like January, February time, I was like, okay, I should probably get a flight home a little sooner before that because I also had to file my taxes. I also had to do all of this stuff and get prepped for this wedding. Not to mention on the trip, all of my camera gear got stolen, my laptop, everything. So I had to get like all new stuff. Like
down.
to start over. So I ended up buying a flight home from Helsinki, and I was gonna fly Helsinki to London, and then London to JFK, and then JFK back to Michigan. And so I'm in Stockholm, I'm in Sweden, right? I get this, I'm going back and forth. And I talked to a couple other fellow travelers, right? And we all think alike. And they're like, you know what, dude? They're like, fuck it, just go. They're like, you got to just keep going, man. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I got to keep going. They're like, I was like, what's the worst that can happen, right? Like, I mean, I'm stuck over in Finland. Like, I think there's better places to get stuck, right? I didn't know what to expect. So I'm like, now the time's like starting to click down. I'm like, okay, I either got to go to the airport right now to get back to the US, or I walk to this ferry, right? And it's raining. And I just walked to the ferry. I was like, fuck it. What, like, how many other chances are you going to have, right? To be here. And I'm already this far. Like, I've already made it this far. What's the worst that can happen, right? Like, I just kept asking myself that. So I got on the ferry, and it was the best decision I've ever made, and it was the coolest thing. So I ended my trip in Helsinki, Finland. It was a bit of an eerie time to travel. I think it was just like here, grocery stores, like shelves were getting empty. People weren't walking around on the streets. Like, it was just a really weird time to travel.
Yeah, that weird like ghost town feel.
Yeah, and like getting on the ship, and everybody has masks on everywhere, and like, not to mention,
did you have a mask?
I didn't have a mask out. They were sold out everywhere too. But also I was like, I made it this far. Fuck it. Like, everywhere that I've been, like, I always had hand sanitizer. I've always washed my hands, unlike everybody that now all of a sudden thinks it's like important to wash their hands. Like, that blew my mind. I was like, really?
You're a little late there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should have been washing my hands this whole time.
Wait.
I thought that I only did that once a day.
Yeah. So I didn't have a mask, and I just kind of went. I was a little bit like paranoid, I think, like especially towards the end, and especially because all I kept hearing about is the media from America, right? And like they're just like it's the things that you hear, especially when you're in another country, and the things that the news people say, and it was like a scare tactic. I remember even posting a thing on my Facebook page about like the media is the ones that are winning this game, and everybody was giving me crap about it. And it's like, I'm not saying this virus isn't a scary thing, but it's like the media is definitely putting fuel on the fire with everything that's kind of going on.
Yeah.
And that was my only perspective on that, my thought. Now, leading up to it, so I was walking around the city of Helsinki, and everybody's flights were getting canceled, like leading up to like this date. Like, people are just trying to get home.
Were you like, so I might be stuck?
Yeah.
I could really very, very real scenario where like I'm actually stuck in Finland.
That was the conversations that we were kind of having. Like, everybody was like, well, where do you want to be stuck at? Right? Because it's like, do you want to go home? Some people that I met were just starting their trip. like
Oh, yeah.
that week, you know? And it was like, I remember a guy that was in the same room as I in my last hostel, and he came from the Netherlands, and that was his first city was Finland.
Oh.
And he even had to go home the day before. He's like, dude, and I just was honest with him. I was like, man, he was a younger kid and we were talking, but I was like, it's honestly, it's just not a fun time to travel right now. Like, you don't get to see stuff how it should be. You don't get to, like, and you're constantly worried or how many things were closed down. Like, everything was,
I was just going to say, like, it probably would be not. I mean, there's probably so many places that you wouldn't be able to even go into to see, to like walk around, and even like, I mean, yeah, the tourist stuff, like a museum is probably closed, but even more so, like parts of cities being like closed, and like you can't stop it. What if you can't just stop into like a cafe and like hang out and eat and stuff like that? All of a sudden you're like traveling in a place that you're not super familiar with, and you're having to like cook or like find a place to stay that will let you stay, because I feel like that would not be fun.
A lot of places towards the end were accepting people, but it was a 2-week minimum, because if you were going to be there, you had to be there for 2 weeks and like getting out and doing it. So I remember walking around the city, and there was 4 other people with me, and all of their flights got canceled leading up to it. And I was kind of a little bit cocky. I was like, oh yeah, my flight's still on for tomorrow. Like, I had this all planned out. I was like, there's no way this is going to go as planned. And like, that's their mindset, right? I'm like, just jokingly about it. And I get a message, and it was like, oh, your flight was canceled. So my flight from Helsinki to London was canceled for the next day. So this was on the next day. So this is on March 16th. Yeah, March 16th at the time.
And had your wedding canceled already?
No, they were still going. Yep. So at this time, everything was still going. They were messaging me. Like, I was getting all kinds of messages. Like, I just couldn't even reply to people. And like, I didn't know what to say to them.
Did you tell your couples that you were going to be taking this big trip?
Yeah. Yep. So I kept all of them very informed with everything and being over there. And I was still able to kind of work a few days while I was on my trip. But, and that was their big worry. And I completely understand. They're like, hey, you know, we're going to have a lot of relatives there, a lot of older people, and just kind of where you've been in this past few weeks, my family's just a little bit more concerned. And I was like, totally understandable. I was like, I have other photographers I can recommend. Just let me know what I can do. And long story short, they changed their wedding date to later in the year, and I'm still able to shoot it. So it all worked out in the end. But yeah, it ended up taking me a total of 5 flights to get home. And not one of them was an original flight that I should have been on. So it's just kind of like going with the flow. I would look at, like, there's so many apps. I can see what flights are leaving, where they're going, what routes. So like the route that I took, I kind of just visualized myself, and I was like, okay, well, there's a flight leaving tonight from Helsinki back to Stockholm, and then from Stockholm to London, and then I was overnight in London, and then I flew back to JFK. And that flight, and all of my flights were empty. Like, and there's no better way to fly than an empty plane. I remember seeing
that.
Yeah.
On where you were like, so me and nobody.
Nobody's on my plane. Like, I had the row in front of me, the row behind me. I sat in the back of the plane because I was mentally thinking, I'm like, okay, if anybody's gonna cough, they're gonna cough forward. So if I'm in the back of the plane, which was great, and I sat there and I talked to the flight attendants, and I was like, man, this has just got to be so hard for you guys. And they're like, yeah, we don't have a clue like what's going on, and like we'll be up in the air and we land in a city, and like things change by the minute, and it was really sad. I mean, to see it,
really
but
super stressful for them.
Yeah,
I didn't even think about that. I was in my head when all the I'm blanking on the name of that airline, all the airline like stuff happened. It was like I was like, that is really terrible for all the people who are employed losing their jobs.
So many people.
I didn't even think about the fact that, like, okay, but there are still people who fly planes right now, and like, what does their life look like when like we're mad on the ground about things being canceled and like stuff like that. Try being up in the air for however many hours, and like the world has already shifted.
Yeah.
You're on like a 6 or an 8 hour flight. That's an entire day. Like our whole like state shut down in a matter of a 35-minute like interview with our governor. Can you imagine like 8 hours and you're across like halfway across the world and everything is different? That would be that. I didn't even think about that. That would
that's
be a
what I
rough
was
job.
asking them too, and I was talking to the girl, and they were really friendly because nobody was on the plane, so they'll talk. And that's another tip. If you can, be the nicest person to your flight attendants. I mean, they do so much for you, and it goes so far. But I mean, like talking with them about it, because I was like, well, technically, are they able to stay in the U.S. or do they have to go home? Like all the borders are closing everywhere, and
every
she was
time
like,
they come back, do they have to like self quarantine?
We didn't talk about that. I mean, we talked about like what would happen if there was somebody on the plane that had a high fever or like different thing. It was just so I think they were flying home, but they have a different visa or like a passport, so like they can technically go into other countries and stay longer, different times and things like that. I forgot what it was called, but it was some kind of a special passport. But but the day before I was flying home, I had a few beers the night before, and I woke up and my head hurt a little bit, and I was like, "Oh shit!" Like I thought that kind of gave me a little bit of a scare. I was like, "Does my head hurt from a hangover, or does my head hurt from like a fever?" Like I got fly the next day, so I was trying to be cautious about that. But I spent my last full day of travel in a smoke sauna in Finland, and it was great. Got to kind of sweat everything out, and nobody gave a fuck there. It was like everybody was just sitting like right on top of each other, and like,
well, there's no way anything's surviving
world,
in a sauna like that either.
Yeah, it was the hottest sauna I've ever sat in, and you go and jump in the water too. Crazy people. So that was my trip home, but I made it. I made it home. I got into the country. I got into JFK Airport with a 98.3 degree temperature. The extensive testing. I didn't know what to expect. I was like, what is this quarantine? Like I was a little bit weird, like worried out, and the way that it makes it sound, or the media makes it sound like, oh, if you're outside of the US and you come back, like you're going to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And like,
I was like, temperature every hour.
Yeah.
Like,
what is this going to be like? And they gave me a postcard and they took my temperature, and that was it. And I was like, is that it?
Oh, really?
Okay. That was it. I was like, okay. And then,
well, yeah, I guess.
And then I walked and I grabbed a piece of pizza, and I was like, all right, this is awesome. I'm in New York. I was like, got to use dollar bills again.
I guess it makes sense.
For a piece of pizza.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then I came home, and I did do my quarantine for 2 weeks. And I mean, I'm trying to be as safe as I can. And I wanted to make sure everybody else feels safe too around me. So I know it's hard for like my family and friends and people that I've wanted to meet up with. But I try to do video calls with people when I can, and trying to stay safe, as we all probably are in this time.
Yeah. Man. That's so
crazy, right?
I'm
just giving you anxiety just talking about it.
Yes,
just
like, it really does.
Oh gosh, man.
I'm like, I'm so glad this was you and not me. I would probably be like in some hostel, like in a corner with like some little like Finland lady being like, "Sir, she hasn't moved. Like, she has gone nowhere. She's catatonic in this corner. We can't get anything out of her." And just me being like, being like, that's it. This is all I can do. I can't think. I can't move. I can't breathe. I'm just stuck. But yeah, I'm glad you're back, and I'm glad you're safe, and I'm glad that it was at the tail end. You know, like that it was not a thing that happened like halfway through or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was really, really cool to see your photos. And I hope I've been kind of hoping that you would do like some kind of like something like a gallery or like something that people can like type their emails into us and like see all the really, really cool stuff. Like even if they are, like you said, even if they are just like iPhone photos, you know, some of the stuff that you posted on like your stories is so cool.
Yeah, it was fun. I tried doing the stories so people knew I was alive. Like, I knew it was kind of hard to keep track of where I was at. I didn't even know. And like, I'd have conversations with somebody like 2 days before. I'm like, yeah, I'm on my way to Barcelona. And then I'd call them in 2 days and I'm like,
never mind.
Yo, dude, I'm in Portugal right now.
Yeah, that happened to me.
So my mom just had no idea. I think they just kind of gave up. I'm like, just generalize it. Like, I'm just traveling. Like, and that was part of the game. It's like I didn't want to plan. And I just didn't know where I wanted to be. And that was the most free thing ever. It's like, how many times am I ever going to have that opportunity again of just being able to kind of go wherever and do whatever you want, you know?
Yeah.
So I am very thankful to be self-employed and being able to kind of have a little bit more freedom to do that kind of stuff. But it's just when you have a job and you have a schedule and like you know that in 3 weeks you're going to be working at this place. You might not know the exact time, but you can't just kind of get up and go wherever. So
yeah, that would make a big difference.
But you learn.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't think I could do that. Well, okay, so you talked about trying to like travel efficiently and cheaply, and like being able to be self-employed and have the ability to kind of build your own schedule out and stuff like that. So how do you, because you were gone for 4 months? 5 months?
Almost 5 months, yeah.
Okay. So did you just stash money? Like what? And only go into as much detail as what you want. But I'm curious, like in my head, that would be such a huge thing to like fund without that eventually impacting my decisions, right? Like, okay, where do I need to stop so I can afford to fly home? How broke am I going to let myself get before I have to find a flight home? I'm a
secret millionaire, actually. I'm a secret millionaire.
Oh, well, that ruins my whole question, Brandon.
No. It's a question that I get a lot. It's something that I got all the time. I got a ton of messages of people like,
"Oh, really?
How are you able to travel for this long?" Or how are you able to be on the road? And having that? I do live a very minimalist lifestyle, so I don't really need a whole lot of stuff to be happy. Experiences make me more happy. But going with that, like I said, I've always loved travel hacking. It's always trying to find that deal, trying to find like when it's cheap, having the freedom to kind of travel whenever allowed that to be a lot cheaper too. You know, like I was taking flights when I was over there that were like $23 to go from like Portugal to, I think it was like France. And it was like, it's so much cheaper once you're over there. But also I did a lot of cooking at hostels. Hostels in general are relatively cheap. And trying to make it go as far as you can. Now, something I did always break the math down for people is I say, okay, if you had 100 days of travel, right? And you spent $50 a day. Mm-hmm. And that would be like your food, let's say your hostel or wherever you stayed. That's $5,000. So
that's not that crazy.
Yeah, and when you really start to break it down like that for people, now when you start to get alcohol or go in and get good food, and you're staying at luxury Airbnbs or hotels, yes, things will add up relatively quick. But it's like, how far can you stretch a dollar to go? Another thing, and like I go into a little bit more on talking on other podcasts and stuff about travel hacking and using a credit card, right? So it's like, well, if I'm going to pay for it, I pay it off every week, but I have so many travel miles that way as well. So I don't pay for a lot of flights. And then just like I was able to work still as a photographer, like I said, and selling prints and stuff still while I was on the road. But ultimately it's like, you can be happy off of $0. Mm-hmm. You know, like there's days where you just walk and it's like money doesn't bring happiness, experiences. And it's like the ski race I talked about earlier. You know how much that cost me? $0.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like such a memory and experience that I have. You can get cheap food, you know, like, or having oatmeal or having peanut butter and jelly. Like you don't have to go out every single night. Pasta, so cheap. Right. You can spend $10 on pasta and eat for 3 nights with one person. Yeah. Like it's relatively cheap, you know, and it's a lot of
It's the way
museums
you
are
do it,
free
yeah.
in how you travel, and just having that approach to it. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people that want to go to a luxury hotel or go to an all
Sure.
inclusive. It's just a different way of traveling.
Well, and I feel like that's a totally different mindset, I think, too. And it's a different way of like setting out with that. Like if I were gonna do
Mhm.
something like that, I would plan it out and I'd be like, right, what I talk about, a vacation
Yeah.
versus a trip. Like I'm
Yeah.
gonna drop a pretty penny on a vacation so that I can do that. Where I'm like, I'm gonna walk into this place and be served an amazing meal. Like
Yeah.
and you set out with a very different intention for that.
And in vacations, like you spend a lot of money in a week because you're like, how much can we do in a week? And you're constantly
Right.
going out and you're not afraid to do it. And it's like, but when I was traveling for a long time, it's like not every city I wanted to go do big excursions and trips. Like
Right.
when I was in Switzerland, I knew that I wanted to snowboard. So I spent a decent amount of money and I rented a
Yeah.
really good snowboard and a full snow setup and everything. But I didn't do that at every city. Like I would walk around. There's, like I said, it costs $0 to be happy and have fun. You can just find different ways.
Yeah.
And you can, there was days where I would spend a lot of money and there was days where I'd spend nothing. And like,
Yeah.
they're equal to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just, ultimately it's like, how bad do you want it? And if you need to budget for yourself, that's totally doable, and really talk about that. But there's a lot of cheap places to travel and a lot of cheap flights, especially
Yeah.
right now. Tons of cheap flights.
Just be careful.
They'll reimburse you.
They'll reimburse you.
Trust me.
And then trust me, I'm gonna take your word for it from the guy who said that just to get home, he had five flights, but 5 of them were also canceled.
Yeah, but they were all
In the
empty flights.
process.
I was able to lay out. It was the best flight ever. I was able to lay out
Laying on
across
the aisle in the floor.
And
Sir?
because I sweet talked them, because I sweet talked the flight attendants, they didn't even use the aisle that I was in. They let me lay my feet out in the aisle. They didn't even have to wake me up to hit the card
That's
on
awesome.
my foot. So, but yeah.
Well, okay, so I know you did mention it a little bit earlier, I think, but I'm not gonna guess that this was your hardest thing to cope with. So what in that whole time was the hardest things or thing for you to like overcome or to like cope with?
I mean, like one instance stands out for sure, and a lot of people have heard this story. It kind of went around a little bit, but when I was in Belgium, I had my entire bag stolen off of the train,
Yeah.
and that was a huge like changing moment for me of my trip. Now leading up prior to this, like 2 weeks before this happened in Belgium, I was in Barcelona for New Year's Eve. It was right after I flew from Iceland to Barcelona. I
Was
was in
that amazing?
Iceland was, it's a whole new level. It's
Yeah.
just insanely beautiful.
My family went there without me. I was so
Yeah,
I was
you should
really
go.
actually
You entirely
upset.
should go. I have tons of recommendations if you need them.
Yeah.
But I flew to Barcelona. I spent New Year's Eve in Barcelona. Within 6 hours of being in Barcelona, I had my phone stolen. So my iPhone, like that night, had so
I didn't know
everything like
that.
on that. Yeah. So that was like a couple weeks like before, and I was like, okay. I knew this trip wasn't going to go perfect, right? And by now I've been
Sure.
on the road for like 2 months, and I was like, it's just things. It's things that can be replaced. I was okay with it. I was like, I wanted to enjoy this trip anyways. I was more bummed because I had my camera, I had a lot of photos on there. I lost a ton of pictures. So that was like the
Oh,
first
no.
like impact on that. And then leading up a couple weeks later, I'm in Belgium. I have my entire bag stolen off of the train, and I pretty much like watched it happen, and that had everything in it. And that was devastating. I remember I had a buddy with me that traveled with me for a couple weeks, and I remember looking at him and I was like, every single thing was in there, like my passport, my drone, my
Oh, wow.
laptop, my camera, had every single thing except for like my clothes pretty much. And
Your wallet?
I had my wallet on me, and I had like my train pass on me. Just had all of my valuables and everything.
Wait,
And
so what do you mean you saw it happen? Like you were in one part of the train and you like knew where your bag was?
So I set my bag on the racks, which is a terrible idea, but it was a long travel day. I was exhausted.
Yeah.
I was trying to I sat
Well,
down.
that's what they're there
the train,
for,
and
right?
yeah, and the train was pretty empty, right? And it was just me, my buddy, and then the guy that stole my bag. But it was like, so like there was only three of us on the train. And then like, as soon as the train took off, the conductor comes by and like, is that your bag? And I was like, nope, that's not my bag. And that guy left his bag with like a pack of cigarettes in it. And then he took my bag. So, I mean, like you kind of see that. And then in leading up to it, I was going to send that whole bag home. So I was like, a couple days before, I was like, I'm sick of carrying this fucking bag around. Like, I just wanted to, it was so heavy. Like, you're amazed at how heavy electronics get, right? We work in technology. We all understand that. But like, you start to add in cameras and lenses and microphones.
Yeah,
and drones,
it's a lot.
things that add up, right? And yeah, so I didn't have the bag. And I get off the train, and the first thing I see is a homeless family and somebody digging in a trash can for like pop cans or food or whatever. And I instantly knew like that moment that I had to change my perspective of everything. I had to like, my mind had to change or else I'd never get over this. And at the end of the day, it's technology, it's things, and things can be replaced. I was just thankful that my heart was still beating, and that I was still able to kind of continue moving on with that day. I wasn't hurt. I was very heartbroken. I was speechless. Like I just didn't know what to do or say. And it was a terrible travel day. Probably the worst travel day I'll ever have. But it's what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Right. And in leading up to it, I mean, it was the craziest, like 72 hours. I lost my passport. How the story kind of ends, I actually got my passport back. Somebody from Belgium added me on Facebook, and they found my passport on the side of the road. So I was able to get my passport back right before.
But it wasn't your bag. And so the guy that stole your bag like chucked your passport?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They knew exactly what they were doing. It's just like, it's a very common thing over there, and even like the officers and everything will tell you. And then I go to the police station, and they're just like, yeah, there's no cameras or anything in any of the trains or the stations from Belgium to Amsterdam. I'm like, oh, cool. They're like, it happens like 9-10 times a day. I'm like, oh. My fucking Uber driver has a dash cam in it, but these trains that have been here since the beginning of days don't have a camera in it. Are you kidding me? Like the trains are the worst designed things I've ever seen. Very, very convenient, and I was very thankful for it. But the cabins themselves could be designed so much better. They don't make any sense at all. But it's an experience.
So you got to like whatever kind of like police like version of police they have, and they were just like, sorry, can't help you.
I had to fill out a police report because I knew I needed it for like insurance purposes. And, but the whole time he was just telling me like they were nice guys, just not very helpful. They just like they were stuck on the fact that I had a drone. They couldn't get over the fact that I had a drone.
Like they were excited that you had a drone?
Yeah, I mean, they were more curious about it, and they had to register it as a vehicle. So I had like a stolen vehicle, and they're like, what was in the bag? And I was like, all right, let's do this.
Everything.
Everything.
Everything. I went over this. Like,
yeah, I made them put on there. Like I went through everything. So I was like, your brain just starts to think like, what did I have in there? Like, what did I have? And I'm like, I had a titanium spork. I had my headphones. I had a bunch of dongles and Debbie dongles for my MacBook that I don't have anymore. I had hard drive. Like I just started naming everything, and then it was like a few pages long, but it was raining outside. I had nothing better to do, and this guy was just like, yeah, this happens all the time. And then I go to the embassy, and they were like,
for your passport.
For my passport, yeah, the next day, and they're like, "Oh, do you have an appointment?" And I was like,
What?
"No, I didn't know you needed an appointment for this." So I made an appointment.
And they were like, "Yeah, have you ever been to the Michigan DMV?"
Yeah, but dude, embassies were just crazy. I've never been to one. I hope nobody ever has to go. It's like so many fences and so many like office. It was just the U.S. embassy. Nowhere else is like guarded. And then the U.S. embassy's like fenced in, got barricades, got to go through 14 different metal detectors,
Classic.
cavity checks. They're just doing everything just to get into fucking place. I get in there and I can't wear my watch. I can't wear anything. I can't bring my bag. I can't have anything inside of this place.
For safety. That's their thing.
I guess.
Safety? Oh.
I don't know. I was so confused. I was just like, all I need is my passport. Like, I need my passport. I didn't know what to do. So I go the next day. I make the one appointment they have the rest of the month was the following day at 10. This is when anxiety kind of kicked in a little bit. I was like, okay, if I don't get this passport, not to mention, I don't even have a passport and I'm in another country right now. Like, what? I have no idea.
Yeah,
like,
what would you do? Did you find anyone to ask? Like, if I don't have a passport, like, do you arrest me? Like, what happens?
Like, so I went to the embassy to get my new passport. And that's when I got a call from the guy, or I got a Facebook message from the guy who didn't speak any English. And our conversation was all done through Google Translate. So shout out to that Google Translate app.
Yeah.
Helped us a lot. But luckily, my passport, I didn't cancel it. So I was able to still use that passport. Because if I would have canceled my passport, I would have been issued a new temporary passport. But it would have only allowed me to go from from where I was at back to the U.S.
So you were like mentally prepared to walk in to the embassy and walk out with a temporary one that was basically like sending you home.
I didn't know what it was going to be like. I had no answers.
Okay.
Like, that's what they told me would have happened. Granted, I worked it out. I was like, okay, now I have this guy that has my passport. Do I leave my appointment? That's just the only appointment to get a new passport. Like, is this guy fucking with me? Are they just going to like start asking me all the questions? Like, what's your passwords for all this stuff? Or like, how do you fly this drone? Or where's the remote at? Like, I was a little bit worried about everything. And I was like, well, this is technically a stolen property because they had my passport. So I asked, I'm like, hey, is there an officer or somebody that can kind of go with me to meet this guy, to get this? Like, I don't know what to do. And again, I just went with my gut, and I just went with it, and I met this guy. He had my passport, and I realized, like, you know what? At the end of the day, again, it's just things, and it's like,
right,
it can all be.
But he ended up being a cool guy.
Yeah, he had my passport. I was really pumped. And our conversation was all done with hugs and smiles, and he knew how excited I was, and it was just cool to kind of experience that. I took a picture with him, and then I hopped on a scooter to go back to the hostel to meet my buddy, and like almost ate shit because it was a rainy day, and I pushed the brake really hard. I was so excited, and I pushed the brake and went. So, but I made it back, and then we made it to Amsterdam, and then the whole rest of the trip, trying to explain this story to people, I had to repeat it like 1,000 times, and that's why I decided, like, you know, I needed to start a podcast, and that's the very first episode is just me sharing
like
all of the details that go into it. So yeah, it's crazy, but travel isn't about the places you go; it's about the stories you build along the way.
Yeah. So you would dub that as like the biggest. Well, there's a couple things tied together, but like some of the like one of the biggest things to like kind of overcome.
Yeah, and I knew that like if I can make it through that, like I could make it through anything. And again, it's like a year ago. I mean, before my trip, if that would have happened, I definitely would have handled things completely different. I think I would have been much more devastated than I was. But I also knew like I was living my best life. I was living my true dream. I was living my ultimate dream of just being able to travel.
Well, and that's what you set out to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I was like, I can't let technology stop that. You know, it was a bummer, but from the beginning of my trip, I remember talking with Caleb and I was like, dude, all I want to bring is my iPhone. And everybody was like second guessing me, and they're like, "You should really bring your
No, I
camera.
told you to
And you
do
should
it,
really
man.
bring your camera."
I was like iPhone and a
And
couple
I was
GoPros
like,
and just go.
dude, that's what I'm saying. Like, take a different approach to it. And if I could go back and do it again, that's all I would take. Honestly, is my phone.
But you were saying that you did kind of like cave and bring a bunch more stuff with you. You're saying,
Yeah, because that was back when I would listen to other people. I'd listen to other people's opinions, and it was like, yeah, and like you start to second guess that, right? You're like, especially when people have other opinions, and I think that's like the world that we live in now is like people have opinions on everything, and that opinion affects you because they're just like it makes you start thinking about that, or you
yeah,
read
you
the
second guess
comments.
yourself.
Yeah, and that was the way it was like when I was going, and my mom was like, Brandon, I really think that you should bring your camera. You're gonna regret this. And then it starts to go through my head like, am I gonna regret this? And it starts to play through so many times that now I'm starting to think like, yes, I'm gonna regret this if I don't bring this. And then it starts that whole like snowball effect where it's like, well, if I bring my camera, now I gotta bring my laptop. And if I bring my laptop, I gotta bring external hard drives and I gotta bring card readers. So like things just started adding up more and more and more. And at the end of the day, it's like
thousands of dollars in a bag.
Yeah.
And that's heavy that you're carting around.
Totally. And it goes back to those options again. I know that's something that I struggled with a lot was like when I have too many options, that's why I always flip coins and stuff is when I have too many options, I just don't know what to do. And it was like, well, do I shoot this picture? And you probably have the same thing being a photographer, Joel. I was like, do I shoot this with this lens or that lens or this camera or this camera? And
do I have enough time to switch lenses and shoot multiple?
And then I'm like, do I want to bring the GoPro or do I want to bring my camera? Do I want to have it out? Do I not? And like, it's just so much shit that goes through your head that at the end of the day, when you have one device that can do everything from book plane tickets and hotels and take pictures and shoot video and record audio and listen to music, it's amazing. And I think it's quite charming to have a device like that in this world.
That you can kind of just like take with you and
that's all you need.
Yeah.
I'd bring a backpack,
an iPod,
one other
an internet device, a phone, an iPod, and an internet device. Are you getting it yet?
A phone, an iPod.
They're the same thing.
One of the greatest keynotes of all times.
Too funny. Well, I mean, those were kind of like my main questions besides just like mental health wise, like anything else that stood out to you or things that you learned or that you like would want other people to know for life or for traveling or anything?
I think like I could talk about travel all day with anybody, but ultimately, if I could give any advice, it's go travel alone. Go out and explore on your own, whether that be a weekend trip or a trip to the beach or a trip to an all-inclusive resort or a trip to Europe, wherever that may be, just go alone and really take care of yourself. Fill your own cup because nobody else is going to fill that for you. And ultimately, you're going to learn so much about yourself. You're going to come out so much stronger in what you really like and what you don't like. But just go alone so you don't have to worry about any other person other than yourself. And if you want to read a book for 7 days straight, then you do that. But take care of yourself. And if you want to go explore and go try new food, but do what you want to do. You don't have to sacrifice what food you want that day for somebody else's appetite. Or if you want to relax by the pool and they want to go do something, you get to take care of yourself. And I think that was the best thing about this trip for me was that and not to be selfish, but I didn't give a fuck about anybody else. I didn't care about anybody else and nobody else mattered. And that's what I wanted ultimately. Like it was all about me. And like sometimes you need to be selfish and you need to take care of yourself in that way. And I think like as much as I love to give, and I know you two are also givers, it's so important to fill your own cup because nobody else is going to fill that cup for you. So that's what I would kind of leave everybody with is just kind of go out and do what ultimately makes you happy and find that happiness.
I love it. Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Caleb, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. That's
Yeah.
we got a lot of great stuff done.
Good. Okay, so where can we find you, and where can people ask you more questions, and what's your podcast and some of the other ones that you've been on? Tell us where we can find more Brandon.
Yeah. Well, currently you can find me at my home for the next few weeks.
Hashtag stay at home.
Hashtag stay at home. But you can find me on Instagram. It's Brandon Likes to Travel. Otherwise, my photography is just Brandon Shafer Photography, or brandonshafer.com. But I'm kind of out there on that internet world. I probably should be more. But yeah, if you have any questions or want to hear more, other like things I've kind of talked about. I've been on other podcasts talking about travel with other friends, so those are out there. But I have a new podcast project that I'm starting, and right now it's just Brandon Likes to Travel, where we get to share travel stories, tips, and tricks, and just kind of everything else. So, and that might be expanding soon. So,
Yay!
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm excited. So that's where we can find more Brandon. And as always, if you have liked our episodes, like and subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to. You guys can always leave us a review, and all of the emails and messages and comments and everything. I read all of them. Caleb and I read them and talk about them and try and get questions answered and everything. So you can find us at Feisty Mindfulness everywhere.
Everywhere.
Are you on TikTok? Are you on?
No, I haven't done TikTok.
That's the
I'm
new
nervous.
hip TikTok. I know. Is it
Am I
another
too
rabbit
old
hole that
for
we're gonna
TikTok?
go?
Yeah,
Oh.
Dude, nobody's too old for
Brandon.
TikTok. I'm seeing like grandma and grandpa's on there. Like,
Yeah.
but do I have time for it? Is my question. Like, I don't even have time.
Do you want to create time for that? Because
That is a
I
good
have asked
question.
myself about social media, where I'm like, for a long time, I was like, hey, I know that there's like a Twitter out there that's Feisty Mindfulness, but do I really want to spend time figuring out how to Twitter?
Yeah. I know they say you
And
need to
then I
post
was
more, but
like-
it's like I don't give a shit. I don't care enough. Like, ultimately, I gave out all my energy. I spilled my whole cup out on MySpace, and I don't have time for any of this other bullshit. Oh, look at that chunky cat.
Gizmo.
Kitty. Oh, thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It was
I really
great. I'm so
appreciate it.
glad we were able to talk. I'm excited to see it roll
Yeah.
out and go more.
I'm excited.
And maybe we'll do reverse roles. I know Caleb's gonna jump on and talk with me a little bit about coffee, but I would love to hear about like diets and like different things too. So I think that'd be kind of fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Something different.
different.
Something different. So
Sweet. Well,
guys.
thanks again to Anchor for sponsoring our show, and we'll see you next week.